The conference hall froze as the LED screen behind the stage flickered, then displayed one chilling line in bold white letters. DNA match, 99.98%. Cameras erupted in flashes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Billionaire CEO Greg Whitman gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles whitening as a name beside the result stabbed at him. Lucas Monroe, the young tech rival he'd sworn to destroy, the man threatening his company's empire, was his own flesh and blood. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes stung his eyes. But Greg heard nothing except his pulse and the echo of a lie told 27 years ago. Pride collapsed into horror. Everything he'd built now balanced on one unbearable truth. 27 years earlier, one jealous man schemed twisted love into suspicion and destroyed a home. Tonight, that same lie has exploded beneath the brightest lights in America. How did a husband's pride, a wife's silence, and a doctor's betrayal create the cruelest revelation imaginable? Stay till the end to see how manipulation turned into revenge, and how truth finally demanded payment from power itself. Don't miss a second. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this story so more people witness how one secret can ruin generations and how karma never forgets its address. 27 years earlier, Palo Alto, California. Evening sunlight spilled to the tall glass windows of Greg Whitman's Palo Alto home as he traced the outline of a tiny sonogram photo with trembling fingers. Success surrounded him. Awards, contracts, and a new headquarters rising downtown. But nothing compared to the joy of seeing his unborn child for the first time. His wife, Elena, laughed softly as she painted the nursery, her belly round beneath a white cotton dress. "It finally feels real," she said. Greg smiled, believing their future was unshakable. Yet miles away, another man studied Greg's picture in a magazine, eyes dark with envy, already planning to destroy everything that happiness represented. That man was Howard Kane, Greg's longtime business partner and silent rival. Once brothers in ambition, Howard had grown bitter watching Greg earn the praise he craved. Investors admired Greg's ethics. Reporters adored Elena's warmth, and every compliment to Whitman sounded to Howard like a nail sealing his own invisibility. Late one night, he poured himself whiskey and replayed board meetings where Greg's laughter-filled rooms meant for calculation. "He's getting soft," Howard murmured to his reflection. When he learned Elena was pregnant, jealousy found its weapon. "A family," he sneered, "that'll make him weak, and weakness is leverage." Howard's opportunity appeared at Stanford Medical Center, where a struggling obstetrician named Dr. Nathan Reed owed more money than he could repay. Howard invited him for coffee under the pretense of philanthropy. "I help ambitious men get back on track," Howard said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were $10,000 and a single instruction: convince Greg Whitman the child isn't his. Reed froze, heart hammering. "That's impossible," he whispered. Howard leaned closer. "Impossible only until your debts are sold to someone less patient." Desperation outweighed conscience. Reed nodded once, sealing a bargain that would haunt 3 lifetimes. A week later, Elena arrived for her routine ultrasound. Unaware the doctor performing it had already been bought, Greg sat beside her, holding her hand, smiling at the rhythmic heartbeat echoing through the room. Reed's eyes stayed on the monitor too long. "I see something unusual," he murmured. He printed 2 images, one genuine, one edited, and handed the altered one to Greg. "You might want additional testing." Confusion shadowed Greg's joy. Elena squeezed his hand. "Is something wrong?" He forced a smile. "No, probably nothing." Yet inside, uncertainty began its quiet infection. The seed of doubt had been planted. Howard wasted no time spreading whispers. Over lunch with 2 board members, he feigned concern. Greg's distracted lately personal issues. By evening, speculation reached investors. The rumor, Elena's baby might not be Greg's. Within days, Howard called a stability meeting, urging temporary leadership shifts for the company's protection. When Greg arrived home, exhaustion clung to him. Elena met him at the door with dinner and optimism, but his thoughts were already poisoned. "How well do you really know me?" he asked suddenly. Her fork froze midair. "Greg, what's happening?" He looked away. Maybe I just need clarity before I lose everything. Elena's world tilted. She followed Greg to the hospital for more tests, determined to prove her innocence. But each visit, Reed fed subtle alarm, ambiguous medical jargon, cautious pauses. Science can't always give certainty, he'd say, performing sincerity like an oath. Greg started sleeping in the guest room, claiming workload. Elena wrote him letters he never opened at work. Howard praised Greg's professional focus, staging loyalty while deepening isolation. The man who once kissed his wife's paint-stained hands now questioned every touch. By the time the second ultrasound came, love had become paperwork. Trust, once effortless, was now another contract clause. Reed's falsified report arrived in a sealed envelope marked confidential. Its phrasing was clinical but lethal. Anomalous genetic markers suggest inconsistency. Greg read it alone in his office, blinds drawn, whiskey untouched. Each word struck like thunder. He imagined headlines, billionaire betrayed by wife, and his chest tightened. Pride whispered, act before you're humiliated. That night, when Elena showed him the baby's new blanket, he couldn't speak. The next morning, he called his attorney, initiating a temporary separation for legal clarity. Howard congratulated him privately, masking triumph as sympathy. A forged document had done what no rival ever could, make Greg doubt love itself. Elena refused to surrender. She met Greg and Elaine outside their home, clutching test requests and medical files. Please, just one more analysis, she begged. I'll take any test, anywhere. Greg's jaw trembled, but he hardened it. I can't live like this, he said. Our company, our name, everything's at stake. What about our family, she cried. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as Greg drove away. Inside his car, his phone vibrated with Howard's message. Proud of your strength. Let me handle PR. Strength felt like frostbite. By dawn, divorce papers lay on his desk, still damp from rain. Months later, alone in a Seattle motel under the alias Ella Monroe, Elena gave birth to a baby boy. The nurse who helped her, Naomi Wells, sensed danger before hearing the full story. Keep your head down, she advised, arranging a quiet discharge and a new address. Elena kissed her newborn's forehead and whispered, Lucas. She promised he'd grow, without knowing the cruelty that drove them here. Meanwhile, in Palo Alto, Greg toasted with Howard to a clean start. Unaware the toast was to his own undoing. Two men smiled over champagne. Only one knew it was poisoned with deceit. Dr. Nathan Reed stood alone in his office that night, staring at the ultrasound images he'd altered. The money on his desk looked smaller than he remembered. He reached for his wedding ring, then left it in the drawer. On the monitor, the real image of the Whitman baby glowed, a heartbeat steady and perfect. I'm sorry, he whispered to no one. Outside, a janitor switched off the lights, erasing the glow. In silence, the lies settled into history, ready to sleep for 27 years until truth decided it had rested long enough. Seattle, Washington, 2 decades later. The rise of the sun. 27 years later, the rain returned to Seattle, soft and silver, the way it had fallen the night Lucas Monroe was born. He stood by the glass wall of his penthouse, watching the skyline flicker with his company's logo, Apex Innovations, projected across digital billboards. At only 27, Lucas had built a clean tech empire admired by every young entrepreneur in America. Reporters called him the billionaire with a conscience, but he preferred silence to fame. Beneath his composure lived questions his mother never answered. He knew she had once loved someone powerful. He didn't know that power had almost destroyed them both. Downstairs, a board meeting buzzed inside Apex headquarters. Lucas listened as analysts discuss expansion into renewable housing grids, his boldest project yet. This will challenge every energy giant in the country, his advisor warned. Lucas smiled faintly. Then let's challenge them. Every decision carried purpose. Every risk, a buried echo of the father he'd never met. His leadership was calm, almost surgical, earning loyalty through integrity. Employees whispered he didn't chase money, he chased meaning. Yet deep inside, Lucas's success masked emptiness. He sometimes caught his reflection on polished glass and wondered whose eyes he'd inherited, whose ambition he was unknowingly fulfilling. At home, his mother, still known publicly as Ella Monroe, watched his interviews on the living room couch, tears glistening in quiet pride. She had rebuilt her life as an engineer, keeping her real name and past locked away. Every headline about Apex Innovations both healed and hurt her. She'd given her son everything except the truth. "You did it, baby," she whispered to the television. Naomi Wells, now Apex's lead researcher, visited often, still loyal to Elena after all these years. Sometimes Naomi caught a glimpse of Greg Whitman on national broadcasts and froze, knowing someday fate would weave these worlds together. Across the country in California, Whitman Dynamics, Greg's empire, showed cracks beneath its marble perfection. Profits slid, projects stalled, and investors demanded new ideas Greg refused to consider. Apex Innovations is gaining ground fast. Howard Kane warned during a tense board meeting. Greg's jaw tightened. Another startup chasing publicity. "I built a legacy, not a headline." But Howard smirked, seeing opportunity in Greg's pride once again. "Then prove it," he whispered later, planting seeds of competition. Greg's envy ignited. For the first time in years, he felt something other than regret. He felt threatened, and he didn't yet know by whom. News anchors soon broadcast the inevitable clash. Apex Innovations' revolutionary solar infrastructure directly challenges Whitman Dynamics' dominance. Greg's office filled with chatter, his assistants trying to spin the story, but his attention fixed on the image of the young CEO on screen. Lucas's calm confidence, his tone, even the way he adjusted his cufflinks, it all felt hauntingly familiar. "Who is he?" Greg muttered. "Lucas Monroe," a staffer replied. The name echoed like thunder. Greg didn't recognize it, but something inside him, some buried instinct, tightened. "Set up a competitive analysis," he ordered. "If he wants a war, he'll get one." In Seattle, Lucas received the first lawsuit. Whitman Dynamics accuses Apex Innovations of intellectual property violations. His legal chief read aloud. Lucas frowned, recognizing an attack disguised as formality. "They're trying to bury us in paperwork," Naomi said. Lucas shrugged lightly. "Then let's give them a reason to notice us." That night, he appeared on CNBC, confidently stating, "Innovation isn't about age or legacy. It's about courage to evolve." The clip went viral. Millions admired his composure. Only two people watching from different coasts, Greg and Elena, felt the invisible storm forming between a father and son who no longer knew they were family. Howard watched the viral interview and grinned. "Perfect," he muttered. Two Whitmans, unaware of each other, preparing to destroy themselves, a symphony of pride he'd composed decades ago. He contacted a journalist under an alias, leaking selective details about Apex's funding origins to stir suspicion. Within days, headlines questioned whether Lucas had ties to shady investors. Greg read the reports and smirked. He's not so clean after all. The old manipulation worked like clockwork. Howard planned to sit back, profit from both sides, and finally achieve what he wanted all along, total control of Whitman Dynamics once Greg inevitably fell. Meanwhile, Elena's nightmares returned. She saw the same faces, Greg's, Howard's, and Dr. Reed's, haunting her sleep like ghosts demanding resolution. When Naomi showed her the article comparing Apex and Whitman Dynamics, Elena dropped the newspaper in shock. The photo of Greg beside Lucas was undeniable. Their resemblance struck her like lightning. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He doesn't know." Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then it's time you tell him." Elena shook her head fiercely. "Not yet. If Greg finds out before Lucas is ready, he'll destroy him again." Silence filled the room, heavy with fear and memory. At Whitman Dynamics, Greg's temper flared with each new report on Apex's success. "That boy is disrupting our entire strategy," he shouted. "He's not a boy, he's a visionary," an executive dared to reply. Greg glared. "Fire him." The boardroom went silent. Howard smiled subtly, feeding Greg's anger. "You can't let arrogance rewrite history," he said smoothly. "Remind the world who built this industry." Greg nodded, mistaking manipulation for loyalty. Pride blinded him again, the same way it had all those years ago. And once more, Howard's plan unfolded exactly as intended. Two Whitmans on a collision course neither could escape. That night, Greg stood on his mansion balcony overlooking San Francisco, the city lights trembling like confessions. He held a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink. Somewhere deep inside, the same hollow ache from his youth stirred again. "Why does this man get under my skin?" he whispered to himself, thinking of Lucas Monroe's calm defiance on TV. In Seattle, Lucas looked out at the skyline, wondering about the faceless enemy trying to destroy him. Miles apart, under identical night skies, father and son wrestled with ghosts they didn't recognize, connected by blood, divided by a lie still holding power. Silicon Valley, the rivalry ignites. Pride and power. The tension between Whitman Dynamics and Apex Innovations intensified with every headline. Greg Whitman, now 65, sat in his glass office, surrounded by awards that no longer comforted him. "We'll crush them in the next quarter," he said coldly. His executives nodded, though fear filled the room. Across the coast, Lucas Monroe's name trended worldwide. Every speech he gave about ethical innovation cut Greg's ego like a blade. The rivalry wasn't just corporate, it was personal, though neither man knew why. Greg saw in Lucas a reflection of everything he once was. Fearless, creative, and unwilling to kneel. And that resemblance terrified him. Lucas's team prepared for another major announcement, a renewable energy project that would make fossil fuels nearly obsolete. "If this works," Naomi said, "we'll change history." Lucas smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it does." Reporters filled the Apex lobby, calling him America's youngest self-made billionaire. But Lucas felt a quiet unease he couldn't name. He'd noticed a strained persistence of Whitman Dynamics counterattacks, lawsuits, leaked emails, and planted stories, all too deliberate to be coincidence. "Whoever's behind this isn't trying to win," he told Naomi. "They're trying to break me." She studied his face and whispered, "Then they don't know who they're fighting." Howard Kane watched the growing storm like a conductor guiding chaos. For years, he played Greg and Lucas like chess pieces, nudging them toward inevitable destruction. He scheduled strategic leaks, spread financial rumors, and even hired analysts to misreport numbers, just enough to fuel mistrust between their companies. At a private dinner with shareholders, Howard raised a toast to legacy and transition. No one realized he was toasting their downfall. Greg still believed Howard was his most loyal ally. Lucas, unaware of Howard's existence, viewed him only as another old businessman fading behind the headlines. Both men were dancing to his tune. When the media began calling it the Battle of Generations, the story spread faster than either side could contain. News outlets framed Lucas as the bold young visionary and Greg as the stubborn relic of an older era. Greg slammed his desk watching a report that showed Lucas shaking hands with senators in Washington. "He's trying to make me irrelevant," he shouted. Howard, pretending to console him, murmured, "Then remind the world who built this industry." Greg nodded, pride rekindled. He ordered his legal team to file another lawsuit, this time a $1 billion claim. "I'll show that boy what power really means." The next morning, Greg's company stock dropped by 9%. The lawsuit had backfired, triggering public outrage. Social media exploded with hashtags, hashtag Let Innovation Breathe and hashtag Whitman versus Monroe. Lucas refused to comment publicly but released a statement. True progress can't be sued into silence. It went viral within hours. At home, Greg's son from a later marriage, Daniel, watched the coverage quietly. "Dad, maybe you're taking this too personally," he said. Greg turned sharply. "You don't understand business." "Maybe," Daniel replied, "but I understand regret." Greg didn't respond. For the first time, his son's words echoed louder than applause. Naomi arrived at Apex headquarters early that morning, eyes red from sleepless research. She'd been digging through old hospital archives ever since the corporate war began, haunted by patterns she recognized but couldn't explain. When she found a digital folder marked Stanford Medical Records, 1998, her heart pounded. Inside were fragments, scans, test results, and a signature she would never forget, Dr. Nathan Reed. "Oh my God," she whispered. She printed the files and rushed to Elena's apartment. When Elena saw them, she collapsed into a chair, trembling. "Howard's still doing this," Naomi said, "and now it's her son paying the price." That night, Elena sat by her window holding the old ultrasound photo she'd kept hidden for decades. Her reflection looked older, but the pain in her eyes hadn't aged. "He's fighting his father," she murmured. Naomi nodded, "and neither knows the truth." Elena turned to her friend. "If Greg learns now, his anger could destroy Lucas completely. We need proof, not assumptions." Naomi agreed. "Then I'll get it." Reed kept backups. There's a chance something survived. For the first time in years, Elena didn't feel helpless. She looked toward the glowing apex tower and whispered, "This time, the truth won't hide." Meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, Greg stood in front of a mirror fixing his tie for a televised interview. He practiced lines meant to sound calm but defiant. "Whitman Dynamics has stood for integrity and leadership for over 3 decades, he rehearsed. "We welcome competition, but not corruption." Howard clapped approvingly. "Perfect. Say that word, integrity. It'll remind people who the real pioneer is." Greg smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." Howard's grin widened. "Always have." As cameras rolled, Greg condemned Apex Innovations publicly, across the country. Lucas watched the broadcast in silence, unaware he was staring at the man who'd once abandoned his mother. Later that evening, Naomi called Elena again, breathless. "I found him, Dr. Reed. He's alive." Elena froze. "Where?" "A small clinic outside Sacramento. He's been living under a new license." Elena's pulse quickened. "Then we're going there." 2 days later, they sat across from the man whose lie had destroyed their lives. Reed's eyes were hollow, his hands trembling. "I was young, desperate," he confessed. "Howard paid me to lie. The baby was Greg's. I knew it even then." Elena's tears fell silently. Naomi recorded every word. "You're going to help fix this," she said. Reed nodded, whispering, "It's about time." By the next week, Naomi had gathered enough evidence to expose Howard's decades-old conspiracy, bank transfers, fake reports, and Reed's full confession. She looked at Elena. "This is it. The truth that ruined everything." Elena gripped the flash drive tightly. "Then it's time the world sees it." Meanwhile, Greg prepared for the San Francisco Global Tech Summit, where Whitman Dynamics would face Apex Innovations publicly for the first time. "Make sure security is tight," Greg told his staff. "I don't want any surprises." But destiny had other plans. The surprise waiting for him would not threaten his company. It would break his heart. San Francisco Global Tech Summit, the collision, father versus son. The San Francisco Global Tech Summit glimmered under blinding lights and billion-dollar tension. Reporters swarmed the marble lobby as banners of Whitman Dynamics and Apex Innovations stood side by side like rivals sharing a throne. Cameras captured Greg Whitman stepping from his limousine, his face carved in calm arrogance. Inside, Lucas Monroe arrived moments later, escorted by Naomi and investors. When their paths nearly crossed backstage, the air tightened. 2 generations of brilliance unknowingly sharing the same blood. "Remember," Naomi whispered to Lucas, "you don't need to win with anger, win with truth." He nodded. "And if truth hurts," she sighed, "then it's long overdue." Greg took the stage first, confident and rehearsed. "Whitman Dynamics has always stood for vision, stability, and moral leadership," he declared, voice booming through speakers. Applause followed from loyal investors. Cameras flashed, hungry for drama. Backstage, Lucas listened unimpressed. "He's selling the past," he murmured. Naomi replied, "Then give them the future." When Greg ended his speech, Lucas walked into the spotlight. The crowd rose in curiosity. 2 titans now face to face. Greg's polite smile faltered slightly as their eyes met for the first time. Something familiar flickered there, like deja vu wrapped in dread. He dismissed it, clinging to pride instead. Lucas began calmly, but every word carried precision and quiet fire. True leadership isn't about protecting legacies. It's about creating change that outlives them. The audience leaned forward. He revealed Apex's newest project, Clean energy grids designed to replace Whitman Dynamics' outdated systems. Investors murmured, intrigued. Greg's jaw clenched as the applause grew louder. Howard sat among the guests, expression unreadable, watching the destruction he'd planned decades ago finally unfold. Lucas ended with a line that echoed across the hall. Innovation doesn't fear competition. It exposes corruption. The crowd erupted. Greg's pride fractured, and Howard's smirk widened like the smile of the devil himself. After the session, chaos erupted in the lobby. Reporters surrounded Bocios, microphones like weapons. "Mr. Whitman, will you respond to Lucas Monroe's statement?" one asked. Greg forced a grin. "Young men talk about ideals. Real men build them." Lucas overheard, smirking. "Then maybe it's time ideals replace ego." Cameras flashed. 2 billionaires, one moment of open hostility. Howard stood at the balcony above, whispering to an aide, "Perfect! Keep them talking." The headlines wrote themselves before nightfall. Father and son of industry clash in historic feud. None realized the headline was truer than anyone imagined. Fate was preparing its reveal. Behind the glamour, Howard finalized his betrayal. In a private suite upstairs, he met with lawyers ready to merge both companies under a shell corporation he secretly owned. "Once they destroy each other publicly, I'll own both assets," he said. One lawyer hesitated. "And if the truth leaks?" Howard chuckled. Truth died 27 years ago. At that same moment, Naomi stood outside the media room, clutching a flash drive containing Reed's confession and proof of Howard's decades-old conspiracy. Elena waited in the car nearby, praying for strength. "If we do this," Naomi said softly, "there's no turning back." Elena replied, "There never was." Greg returned to his hotel suite, restless. The cheers from Lucas's speech still echoed in his ears like mockery. He poured whiskey, but didn't drink. "Who is this kid?" he muttered. His assistant replied, "Lucas Monroe, born in Seattle, raised by a single mother." Greg's hand froze midair. Single mother? The words triggered an ache buried for decades. "Find everything about him," he ordered sharply. Alone again, Greg stared out at the city. Somewhere deep inside, guilt stirred, a quiet whisper asking if pride had led him here before. But instead of listening, he tightened his tie and prepared for tomorrow's confrontation. Lucas sat alone in his penthouse, overlooking the bay. The night shimmered with city lights, but his mind felt heavy. "He doesn't even know me," he told Naomi over the phone. "Yet he hates me like I wronged him." Naomi hesitated. "Maybe you remind him of something he lost." Lucas sighed. "Or someone." He gazed at his reflection, unaware he was staring at the same features Greg once saw in a mirror 27 years ago. "Tomorrow's the final presentation," Naomi said. "After that, everything changes." Lucas whispered, "I hope you're right." Fate listened and smiled. The next morning, the summit's final day began with heightened security and breaking news alerts. Today's apex, Whitman's showdown will determine the future of clean energy, announced the press. Greg's team prepared his counter-presentation while Howard adjusted his tie, rehearsing lines for a fake joint merger. Naomi and Elena arrived quietly, disguising their faces among journalists. Elena's heart pounded as she glimpsed Greg from across the hall for the first time in nearly 3 decades. He looked older, hardened, but still the man she once loved. "You sure about this?" Naomi whispered. "Yes," Elena replied firmly. "The truth belongs to both of them now." As Greg took the stage for the final address, Lucas entered from the opposite side. The hall fell silent. "We stand at a crossroads," Greg began, voice steady but cold. Lucas responded, "We stand at a choice, truth or denial." Their rivalry had never been so public. Howard watched, nervous now, sensing his control slipping. Greg's voice rose. "Legacy defines us." Lucas countered, "No, integrity does." Applause thundered as investors debated. Then Naomi stepped forward, her badge flashing. "Enough!" she shouted, holding up the flash drive. "Before this war destroys you both, the world deserves to know the truth." Silence consumed the hall. Howard bolted toward the exit, but cameras already turned his way. Naomi plugged the drive into projector. Screens illuminated with financial records, hospital scans, and Dr. Nathan Reed's recorded confession. Howard Kane paid me to falsify a paternity report. The child was always Greg Whitman's. The crowd gasped. Elena stepped into the light, trembling but resolute. Greg's microphone slipped from his hand. Lucas stared, frozen, his mind trying to connect every piece. Reporters shouted questions as Howard was detained by security. The same lights that once glorified ambition now exposed betrayal. And in that room, truth finally came home. The revelation: the world stops. Truth and consequences. The auditorium trembled under the weight of truth. Every screen displayed Dr. Reed's confession, his tired voice filling the hall like judgment itself. Howard Kane paid me to falsify the test. The child was Greg Whitman's. Gasps echoed. Reporters forgot their professionalism. Cameras zoomed in on Greg's frozen expression. The crowd murmured, voices overlapping in disbelief. "That can't be true," someone whispered. Greg's eyes darted toward Howard, who struggled against security, shouting, "He's lying. It's all fake." But no one listened. The confession continued, exposing payment records, email exchanges, and medical scans. The empire built on deceit had finally cracked open before the world. Greg staggered backward, his chest tightening as decades of denial collapsed into seconds of truth. He looked at Lucas, whose face reflected both fury and confusion. "You knew about this?" Lucas demanded, voice trembling. No, I didn't," Greg whispered, his words barely audible. "Lucas, I swear I didn't know." The crowd grew louder, flashes from cameras blinding them both. Lucas's mind reeled. The rivalry, the lawsuits, the hatred, all born from one man's lie. "All those years you hunted me," Lucas said coldly. "You were chasing your own blood." Greg's lips parted, but no words came. Shame replaced every ounce of power he'd ever felt. Howard's desperate screams echoed as security dragged him through the crowd. It was business. "You'd have done the same," he shouted. But the world had stopped listening. Elena stepped closer to the stage, her hands trembling. "You ruined everything," she said, voice breaking. Howard laughed bitterly. "You all did that yourselves." Naomi turned away, disgusted. The cameras focused on Greg and Lucas, the father destroyed by guilt, the son betrayed by destiny. When the guard hauled Howard away, his final words cut through the chaos. "I didn't destroy your family, Greg. You did." The sentence landed like a gavel, and silence swallowed the room. Greg collapsed to his knees, the polished stage beneath him reflecting the life he'd lost. For 27 years, he'd lived like a man defending a fortress built on sand. "I destroyed my own son," he murmured, gripping the edge of the podium. Elena knelt beside him, tears streaking her face. "You destroyed us," she whispered. Reporters captured every second. The broken CO, the woman he'd abandoned, and the son standing between them. Lucas turned away, struggling to breathe. The audience no longer saw billionaires. They saw a family undone by pride. Every flash of light felt like another nail in Greg's coffin of regret. Lucas finally spoke, his voice calm but shaking with emotion. "Do you have any idea what you did to her? To me?" Greg tried to reach for him. "Lucas, please, don't." Lucas snapped. "You don't get to say my name like that." The crowd held its breath. "You spent years trying to destroy me, ruin my company, humiliate me in public, and now you find out you were destroying your own son." Greg's lips quivered. "I didn't know. But you believed it," Lucas said bitterly. "You believed her lies without a thought." The tension in the room thickened until even the air seemed to ache. Flashes of memory stormed Greg's mind. Elena's tears, the ultrasound photo, Howard's comforting lies. Each image stabbed him with the realization of how easily pride had turned him blind. He saw the moment he'd walked away from the hospital, leaving his newborn behind. He saw Howard smirk, the divorce papers, the toast to new beginnings. Now, every success, every headline, every dollar earned felt like stolen currency. Greg pressed a shaking hand to his face, whispering, "God forgive me." Lucas's expression softened for a moment before hardening again. "I'm not God," he said quietly, "and forgiveness isn't yours to demand." Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You think this ends here?" she said to Greg. "You've spent your life running from the truth. You don't get to fix it in one apology." Greg nodded slowly, tears streaming freely now. "You're right," he whispered. "I can't fix it, but I can face it." The cameras turned toward Lucas, waiting for his next move. He stared at the man who had unknowingly ruined his childhood, then at the mother who had sacrificed hers to protect him. "You both lost everything because of the lie," Lucas said softly. "And now that lie belongs to history." The press conference disbanded into chaos as reporters raced to broadcast the scandal of the decade. Outside the summit, rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. Greg followed Lucas through the exit, desperate for one last word. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just want you to know that if I could trade every dollar, every award, every day I lived, I would." Lucas paused under the flashing lights of cameras. "You already did," he replied. "You traded it the day you stopped believing in love." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't look back. He walked away. Howard's arrest dominated every network within hours. Financial crimes, blackmail, and corporate sabotage filled the headlines. Dr. Reed came forward, testifying that guilt had haunted him for decades. "It was supposed to be harmless," he confessed on live TV. But lies never stay harmless. Investors cut ties with Howard's companies overnight. Meanwhile, Greg withdrew from public appearances, facing lawsuits and board scrutiny, yet refusing to step down. "If I built my downfall," he told the press, "then I'll rebuild the right way." It wasn't redemption, just responsibility. For the first time in years, Greg spoke without arrogance and America listened. Lucas watched the chaos unfold from a Seattle penthouse, rain sliding down the glass like slow tears. The revelation had freed him, but it hadn't healed him. Naomi sat nearby, silent, understanding that victory sometimes feels like loss. "Are you okay?" she asked. Lucas shook his head. "Not yet, but maybe someday." Across the country, Greg sat alone in his office, staring at the same photo of Elena he'd kept hidden all these years. For once, there were no cameras, no contracts, no applause, just a man and his consequences. 2 lives broken by lies, finally learning what truth costs. Lake Union waterfront, regret and reflection, aftermath and redemption. Weeks after the summit, news headlines began to fade, but the echoes of truth remained. Howard Kane faced federal indictment for fraud, blackmail, and decades of corporate manipulation. In the courtroom, he looked smaller than he'd ever seemed. His expensive suit couldn't hide the ruin of arrogance. Dr. Nathan Reed testified next, admitting to the falsified ultrasound, his voice trembling as he said, "I thought I was saving my career, but I destroyed lives instead." Reporters scribbled furiously, the world finally hearing confession that had slept for 27 years. Justice moved slowly, but this time it was unstoppable. Elena watched the trial from home, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She'd aged gracefully, but her eyes still carried the weight of decades lost to fear. When the verdict came, Howard Kane sentenced to 20 years in prison, she didn't cheer. She only whispered, "Finally." Naomi, sitting beside her, smiled softly. "It's over." Elena shook her head. "No, Naomi. The court punished the crime. But forgiveness, that's something else." Outside, the Seattle rain returned, gentle and cleansing, as though the heavens themselves were washing away the last traces of deceit from her life. Across the country, Greg Whitman faced his own reckoning, not from judges, but from conscience. He remained CEO of Whitman Dynamics, refusing resignation despite investor pressure. Instead, he dismantled every corrupt policy Howard had built. "No more shortcuts," he told his board. "No more silence." He created internal ethics reforms and mentorship programs for young innovators. Employees whispered that he was a changed man, no longer chasing headlines but seeking redemption. Alone in his office late at night, Greg would look at old photos of Elena and whisper, "You were right." It wasn't forgiveness he sought anymore. It was atonement through integrity. Lucas, meanwhile, led Apex Innovations into a new era. His company became the model for ethical technology, winning awards for sustainability and transparency. Reporters asked about his feud with Whitman Dynamics, but he always answered the same. The past taught me that revenge doesn't build. Truth does. Naomi remained by his side, her loyalty unshaken. She watched him grow from a wounded son into a visionary leader who understood that strength wasn't about pride, but purpose. When asked about Greg, Lucas paused, smiled faintly, and said, "He's learning a lesson I had to live through. That's enough for me." Months later, Greg received an invitation. Apex Innovations Global Ethics Summit. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but at the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note. "For the sake of truth, Lucas." Greg stared at it for a long time. He attended quietly, sitting in the back row as Lucas delivered the keynote speech. "Integrity," Lucas said, "is not inherited. It's chosen, every day, especially when no one's watching." The room applauded. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the crowd. No words passed between them, but the silence said everything that needed saying. After the event, Greg stepped outside onto the pier overlooking Lake Union. The city glowed across the water, soft and golden against the night. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Lucas approaching. They stood side by side, the air heavy with unspoken history. "You were good up there," Greg said quietly. Lucas nodded. "I learned from the best and the worst." Greg managed a sad smile. "Both were me." Lucas exhaled, the anger gone. "Yeah," he said softly, "but I made peace with that." The wind carried their reflections across the water. Father and son, finally still. Elena watched from a distance, standing beside Naomi near the conference doors. "He finally met him," Naomi whispered. Elena nodded. "Yes, but I think forgiveness came long before tonight." She looked out at the two men on the pier, one older and broken, the other young and whole. For the first time in decades, the ache in her chest began to fade. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said, "healing doesn't come from apologies. It comes from acceptance." Naomi smiled. "You think they'll ever be a family again?" Elena took a deep breath. "They already are, just not the way they expected." A month later, a journalist published a cover story titled "Legacy Rewritten: The Whitman-Monroe Redemption." It chronicled their journey from enemies to quiet allies. Readers across the nation called it the most human story in modern business. Greg declined interviews, telling reporters, "Some stories don't need my voice anymore." Lucas, too, avoided the spotlight, letting his work speak for him. The media moved on, but those who followed their story remembered that moment of revelation forever. The night two men discovered blood was thicker than ambition and truth stronger than pride. It became a story America would never forget. In his final years, Greg dedicated himself to rebuilding what greed had broken: trust. He spent weekends mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them about the cost of arrogance. When one student asked, "What's your biggest regret?" Greg smiled sadly. Believing a lie was easier than facing the truth. He never remarried, though he'd had a brief relationship years after his divorce, one that gave him another son, Daniel. Their bond remained respectful but distant, scarred by Greg's obsession with work. Still, Greg took comfort knowing both his sons had grown into good men. He lived quietly in Seattle, proud at last of the truth. One evening, Greg sat on a bench overlooking Lake Union, the same spot where he and Lucas had once stood. The sun dipped low, painting the water in gold. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you for letting me see the man you became." A soft breeze brushed his face, gentle and forgiving. Across the city skyline, the lights of Apex Innovations shimmered like constellations, proof that even broken beginnings can end in beauty. The story of Greg Whitman and Lucas Monroe was no longer one of betrayal and pride, but of truth, redemption, and the legacy love leaves behind.